And it's rewarding education in the field. The second one, implement recruitment strategies to increase child care slots in the community. So part of the reason we hear people aren't entering the field is because it's expensive to start up and it's expensive to get that business up off the ground. And so looking at each home child care provider that's caring for 10 children as a small business and providing them with some incentives to do that and getting them support in order to get them off the ground is a component of the program. And then lastly, to create an organizational fund that will continue to sustain the program into the future. That was the missing plan in 2012 when dollars changed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that history in a minute. But we didn't have that fund created, and we have gone from what you will see now, 134% turnover in 1999, when we originally started this work in addressing quality child care issues in our community. That was when CAPS got involved. That was when the Smart Start funds, which is the Master Tobacco Settlement dollars, came into our community. And we were just filling a gap. There was no quality of care that was consistently being maintained in our community. And so at that time, CAPS became the fiscal agent and worked with hundreds of child care providers, literally, in our community over the course of the next 12 years. By 2009, the turnover rate had been decreased to 31.6%. So we know this plan works that we're talking about. We're not talking about a dream, a pipe dream that has no data, has no baseline evidence of what works. We know that this works. We've done it before. The gap was the sustainability, and so we want to address that this time with our plan. The wage supplements that took place were for staying in the field. So for every 6 months that a child care worker was in the field, they would receive a bonus for staying working in the field, and that would continue. And then for each educational attainment that they received, so it would be the CDA, your child development accreditation, your associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a master's degree in the field of early education, they had additional bonuses for that education, which naturally increases the quality of care that children were receiving. We also offered education scholarships that increased the skills and the knowledge during that time to encourage employees in the field that wouldn't have access to doing that independently. So this is the snapshot at our state's investment into our community. Back in 2000, when the Master Tobacco Settlement dollars were established, they determined that they wanted those dollars to go towards early education. Do you not have this slide?
In their packet. It's in mine.
It's in the other one?
Yeah.
Okay. It's in Mike's presentation, so you'll see it here in a minute. You have it as a reference. So the state diverted those funds that were coming through the Master Tobacco Settlement dollars, and they said, we need to put this back into early education in our state. And Salina was one of the original grantees for that program, specifically to address wages and to address quality of child care. So you can see there the amount of money that was invested over that 9-year period totaled $5,378,476. And our local investment came through 2 different sources. For the original first 4 years, it was through the Salina Regional Health Foundation, and in the last 5 years, and actually there were more years after that, but we did that 10-year look back, was through sales tax money for Saline County. And these numbers came directly off of the CAP's annual audits as we went back to create that look back. So $663,795 locally were invested as match dollars specifically on this particular issue. Now, those dollars still exist in our state, those master tobacco settlement dollars. What happened was the Kansas Children's Cabinet changed their focus. And in 2012, they said, we're no longer going to put this towards wages. We want to focus our effort on early identification of developmental delays. And so we still are the fiscal agent for that project in our community, but we're not allowed to use those dollars for this purpose any longer. The grant money is pretty much exactly the same. We're at $473,000 for fiscal year 2020.
And when did that change happen?
2012.
Has there been any indication with the new administration that that focus is going to change in any way?
Not yet, but the state is conducting needs assessment right now on the needs for early education. They received a $5.5 million planning grant to assess the state's needs. And one of the data points that have come out of the work that's been done so far is that this is not a unique problem to Salina, Kansas.
Oh, yeah.
This is actually a global issue. If you set your Google alerts to early education, you will have an article on this subject across the world every single day in your inbox. Okay, so obviously this would be good for Salina businesses because our workforce would be supported and our employees could get to work, their children would be cared for, and they would have that worry off of their mind because they know that their children are in quality care. If we can solve the problem locally, it will recruit people to our community, supporting our local economy. Obviously, again, it connects directly to the Imagine Salina goals of increasing our workforce by 1,000 employees over the next couple years. So this slide again talks about the return of investment. That $7 to $12 per dollar spent in early education and how that equates over the lifetime of a child in school. So you see if you can front load that in prenatal programs and programs that target the earliest years, you have a decrease of investment that takes place the older the child gets. So when we were talking earlier about that $13,000 annual investment, which is the average across the state of Kansas, I don't know that that's the Salina number. I know it's not the Southeast of Saline number because we can operate a little more efficiently with one building. But that $13,000 can flip. It's how do we work with that? And we know that that's not your decision at the city level to make that decision how those school board dollars are used and how our legislature allocates those funds. But you certainly can be a voice for our community as you're working with our locally elected state officials and our federal officials to think about how those dollars are utilized and where we want to use them. And we know that there will have to be a time frame where there's a transition. But this really isn't part of our plan, our local plan, but it is a part of the bigger solution.
So we're going to start thinking now a little bit more specifically about the actual GROW ECE early childhood education that we're going to be piloting very soon. We believe that we will impact about 4,100 employees that are currently in our industry across Salina. Out in every industry, in retail, in the healthcare industry, every imaginable location that employees are, we think we're going to be able to have a touch on them. We know that we're going to impact a minimum of, well, actually more than 200 child care workers. So again, getting that wage from $8.25 to $12. You know, in my dream world, it would be $15, but we're not there yet. So I will be satisfied with a $12 increase, or a $12 up to $12, and then almost 600 early childhood folks will have a direct impact on their lives, day in and day out, with a high-quality child care facility. So we are thinking about this, as Lori said, in a multi-pronged funding strategy. Each year, we're estimating that it's going to cost us about $800,000 to really stabilize and grow the early childhood workforce. Right now, we already have 105,000 secured. So we're on our way, and we're slowly making progress. Our funding strategy includes grants. It will include business support. It will include public investment, and then also fundraising. Then to Lori's point earlier, for us to have a long-term sustainable plan, we're going to grow an organizational fund that will live off the interest. It will take us probably 3 or 4 years to get there, but we're going to build a $10 million organizational fund that we only use the interest, so that we won't be coming back to business every year, or to individuals every year, or to city commissioners every year. We want it to be a long-term sustainability.
Clarify one thing, so the 800,000 is per year,
Correct.
and then the 105,000, is that a annual pledge or a one-time?
Actually, we have a sort of verbal assurance. The 100,000, let's start there. They believe that they can sustain it for 3 years. And that is funding the staff that we need internally to get all of this working and up and running. The 5,000 was from a local foundation that I think if we would go back, there would be additional resources. But yes, at least, I think, 3 years.
Okay.
We are looking at an average 8% return on that $10 million in order to sustain the work.
So we want to get started, and your $100,000 will help us grow the early childhood program. Approximately 85% of that 100,000 will be used for those wage supplements and longevity bonuses. So it will be going into early childhood programs to sustain their workforce. I want to make sure that you're all clear there. We're going to be spreading that out to the programs in Salina that care for young children. About 6% will be used for recruitment. Some of the training requirements, there are new training requirements that child care facilities have to go through to be able to open their doors. So we want to help them with that. Licensing fees, whether it is the state fees or the local fees. There are new fingerprinting costs that we want to make sure that we can help a new program manage. And then 9% indirect. So the bulk of your money is going out into programs that are working with young children every single day.
So the final thoughts on all of these facts are this investment helps our future. Not only the future of our children, but the future of us and the care that we will receive and the quality of life that we'll receive as we continue aging and living. High quality care makes a 2-generation contribution. So it's not just looking at the children that are coming up, but it's taking care of the generation today. It strengthens our workforce. It increases completion of post-secondary education, raising workforce participation, boosting workforce productivity because of attendance issues that come from lack of childcare, and then helping business attract and retain talent. I want to share something with you that I should have said probably earlier, but we met with human resources people through the Society of Human Resource Management Association in Salina about 2 months ago, and we were talking about this issue and what they're hearing from their employees. And in the room, we had about 5 young mothers who literally said they are not considering growing their family because they know they can't find childcare. So we have people in our society that are looking at their future and saying, I can't meet the needs of a child, so we're not going to grow our family. And that's just, it just seems absurd to me that is a reason why a couple would decide that they're not going to have another child. But that's the reality that our young families are facing in our community and across the state. I do believe that if we could solve this program locally, that we would become a regional hub, more than we already are, but that we would be able to attract the highest quality employees here. Because this is an issue that's not being addressed in other places. It does strengthen local economies, enabling parents to work. We have some families whose relationships are suffering because they decide to work split shifts because they can't find childcare. So they have one parent that works first shift and another parent that works second shift, and their marriage falls apart, which is not good for children either. It provides jobs to our community, and often scarce resource for entrepreneurship. So if you look at the economic impact that that one in-home child care provider has on our community, that is a small business. They're paying taxes on their income. They're supporting 10 families potentially through the care that they're providing and increasing those opportunities within our existing workforce. So we really believe that this is, it's critical for our community to figure out a way to solve the problem.
So I want to give credit to the coalition members, and we have some here this afternoon with us. And so there is the list that have been meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, that says Lori, not Liddell.
It's okay.
This whole work started with the help of the Greater Salina Community Foundation. We started working through a strategic doing that the Dane Hansen Foundation was encouraging those local community foundations to work through. And so it's been about 18 months, almost 2 years ago.
That's 2 years.
2 years since this group was formed. We have been meeting really quite regularly to hammer out what is it that we need, who can help us, and what are the long-term benefits that we can garner together. So I think James Heckman is an amazing man. He is a Nobel laureate, and one of the things that he is noted for is his support of early childhood. The best evidence supports the policy prescription: invest in the very young. That's what we're asking you to do today: invest in young children. Lauren, do we have a video?
We think we might. So
right.
Jack and I are going to try a different option.
This will work.
All right.
Oh, I love your
Wow.
wow.
Drew a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Oh, it will.
Everyone, please move up around that screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you've seen it more than once, step back.
Okay, we gotta check. We're checking volume. Hold on a
Yep,
second.
muted.
Whatever.
You're all right,
There we
you're
go.
all right.
Okay.
You may have to hit that one to get it full screen.
I don't think it wants to play the sound, Jack. Like, I've got the sound all the way up on mine. Is there?
Nothing to do with the computer anymore.
It's like it just cuts off the volume because it's turned all the way up on my iPad.
Yeah, I have it up here too.
You can email that link back out and you got it.
I'm sorry, guys.
Hang on,
This will kind of work.
maybe we can
Run that
multitask.
TV speaker to the top.
This is a really good video.
It is.
Well, I was gonna ask, when you were talking about the 18% of income goes to child care in Kansas, is that, or in Saline County, is that similar to what it is in the state or nationwide, or are we high for some reason?
Alicia and Craig needed an early English teacher.
That's
Oh,
it's
Bring about cooks and food on her own table.
Oh,
Look at it.
even though she has a bachelor's degree.
Hold that thought.
Sorry.
And a commercial.
This is Dylan.
Without reservations.
So all this for Gillum's ad?
7 steps on how you can make anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000 as a licensed home child care
childcare.
provider right now.
Oh my gosh.
I do this all the time at home.
Really? I don't usually like to do
You own
this.
your own home. Now,
Which, what, where'd it go?
Let's figure that out, $8,000 a month
Yeah.
income
On childcare?
for childcare.
Not likely.
No.
She earns less than $15 an hour. In fact, more than half of childcare workers and nearly half of preschool and kindergarten teachers reside in.
There, boom. No one do anything.
Alicia and Craig needed an early care and education program for their 2-year-old son, Jaden. Eventually, they found a suitable child care center nearby that offers a nurturing environment for Jaden and is open while they're at work. But it costs nearly $10,000 per year. That's more than a mortgage in most states. Even though they're paying the average price for childcare, it's a financial burden, and now they're expecting a second child. Meanwhile, Jaden's teacher, Sonia, is worrying about how to put food on her own table. Even though she has a bachelor's degree, she earns less than $15 an hour. In fact, more than half of childcare workers and nearly half of preschool and kindergarten teachers reside in families that utilize public assistance. Childcare is complex work that can impact children throughout their lives. Yet Sonia, like many early educators, doesn't receive benefits like health insurance and paid leave. So why do early childhood teachers earn so little when parents pay so much for childcare? There's a flaw in the system. Parent fees alone are not enough to fund quality early education. Let's look at the facts. Parents pay an average of $10,000 annually for center-based care. In certain locations, and depending on the age of the child, the average cost for licensed childcare is even higher. Let's take a closer look at Jaden's Child Care Center. He's one of 40 children attending full-time. Family payments equal $400,000 a year. About 12% goes to rent, utilities, and maintenance. 23% goes for classroom materials, food, and administrative costs. This leaves about $260,000 for personnel. Early care and education is labor-intensive and requires low adult-to-child ratios to ensure quality interactions. Jaden's Center, open 10 hours a day with 40 children and 3 classrooms, needs at least 3 lead teachers, 6 assistant teachers, and 1 director. The remaining money doesn't allow for median salaries, let alone benefits. Parents can't afford to pay. Teachers can't afford to stay. Public investment is the way. We invest in education for older children. Why not for all children? Here's how we can advocate for more public investment in early education programs. Invest in early care and education as other industrialized nations do. If parents are charged, ensure no family pays more than 7% of their income on childcare. Ensure that all teachers have better compensation and workplace support. Those caring for our youngest should at least be paid on par with kindergarten teachers. Question your legislators and candidates about their response to these issues. So let's invest in our teachers and children. Together, we can make it right for children, their families, and their teachers.
I guess I did have a question. You made the point that it impacts school, the school district and learning and the return on investment. Have there been conversations with the school district about investing and getting involved?
I'm the member of USD 305, early childhood, family community liaison, so our conversations are just starting up on that.
Okay. Lauren, can you transition to the other PowerPoint?
One question about the income. I went to a meeting over in Heartland. I guess the lead teachers are paid the same as if they were in the classroom in USD 305, but it's the assistants, I may not have the right term, who are at this lower wage. Is the average that was quoted, meld all those together, or is that just for the assistant teachers?
It's for every child care provider in the whole community, whether they work for the school district.
Right, but it factored in the lead teachers who are on the school board, the USD pay scale?
Yes, it's less. Well, it's based on their education. We used to require that all our teachers had a bachelor's degree. However, due to not finding teachers, many times now we have to use, we try to go with at least an associate's. Those do not make the same as the ones with bachelor's. I mean, some of those can come in making, I think it's probably $10 to $12 an hour. And then the assistants are less.
Is there any job in USD 305 that would be analogous to the assistant,
25,
to the aides in the job?
not in USD 305.
So where they would be a low scale but have benefits available? There's nothing that
Right.
compares.
I just have a couple quick questions. Okay, so like the wage support, would that apply to like organizations like Heartland, like MLK, like as well as like private providers? So it's across the board with everybody. It doesn't matter if, like, say Heartland receives, Head Start funding, they'd still, their assistance would
It's
still be
whatever that
eligible.
difference to get to that $12 an hour average would be.
Okay.
So whoever that is, it was based on the existing workforce that our budget was built.
And maybe I'm a little thick, but tell me again how you get from the 8 to the 12 with the private entities.
That's that $800,000 investment annually that we need to
But I
put
mean,
back
how do you
into
get
it.
that money into the hands of the, what are the guarantees that make that provider give that $4 more to the?
So
to
when
the
we administered it
employee?
previously at CAPS, those checks were written directly to the employee. It was a very labor intensive process, but we've made it work before, and
But it's a bonus
And it's a
based on
partnership.
longevity.
Right.
It's not per hour.
Right.
It's, once you've been in the workforce another 6 months, you get a check for X amount of dollars. So it increases their annual wage versus
Right.
each hour. So you recalculate it each 6 months based on what their wage is currently, what it takes to get to $12 an hour, and they get a bonus, basically.
One of the things, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things that the EEO talked about was having some type of graduated scale and income qualification. And the premise is that not only do you want to offer that wage assistance to the child care providers, but then you ultimately want to get it to providing services to lower income families. I think that's a laudable goal, but part of this conversation just kind of highlighted the point to me that, when we say that it supports higher wage jobs, depending on how it's structured, it may actually support families with lower wage jobs, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that
And I
you
think
need to account for.
Dr. Davis was at the breakfast that we held in December when Dr. Britton Zuccarelli came and talked, and she had her baby with her because they could not find infant child care. It is not an issue necessarily of what people can pay. I mean, she is quite capable of paying for child care. It is an access issue that we do not have enough providers. And the wage seems to be the biggest issue of why people aren't entering the field.
And you mentioned one provider has 3 vacant rooms that haven't.
Speak to that.
And so how many employees are we talking about right there?
So I met with my board, we met at noon. I'm from Salina Child Care Association. I have room for about 62 or 63 more children right now in my building. I need 4 teachers and 8 to 9 assistants. I can't get anybody to apply. We don't even say what we pay. I'm just trying to get people to apply. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. There's very little infant care in town. I have a room that I could take 6 infants tomorrow if I had the staff. So we're trying to figure out on our end what we can do to keep the doors open, because
Were you full when we opened up that new facility?
we were pretty full.
Pretty full.
Yeah,
So
and it's
there's
been,
a decline.
it's been
over-
that decline. We had around 28 staff. I'm down to about 20 right now. I have another one moving to Iowa on Friday, and another one gave me notice in 2 weeks. And so we're getting to a crisis level trying to figure out what to do. There's a majority of my staff that are younger, that are making $8, $9 an hour. They're getting phone calls from debt collectors, and they can't pay their bills. And so I'm the one that answers the phone and has to go get them. So it's a community solution, and we're trying to see what we can do. We're looking at raising our fees. We're gonna try and do that too, but we can't quite come up with what we need. We've been a United Way agency for since we opened, and United Way's making some changes, and so January won't have that United Way money that's helped us. So we're trying to figure out how to come up with that deficit too.
So what's your high funding been from United Way, and is it going to zero? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, over the years, the highest when we were over at First Pres, I probably had about $80,000 from United Way. This year, we're at $39,000, and so January 1 will be zero. So they're working on strategic planning and trying to figure out what they want to do in the community, but it's going to affect not just Salina Child Care Association. There's several early childhood programs, and then other support services in our community through CAPS that also impact our employees too. So we're working on that too.
So are we seeing this statewide, nationally? I mean, this is a
Yes.
trend everywhere.
We are
We're
seeing
not-
it statewide, and I have friends in other communities here in Kansas, and we're talking, and it's the same thing that we're all dealing with right now.
You said talk to the legislators. Is there any discussion at the state level about this?
I think that,
Yeah.
that planning grant that's taking place is really gonna drive that. The work that's been taking place this past 12 months, there will be legislative initiatives that come out of that for next session.
And so it would be very important for our Salina contingency to hear from others outside of the early childhood field.
And Commissioners, I'm by no means a subject matter expert, but I think this is an economic issue. I mean, we're trying to swim upstream against free market economics. And the other thing I would share, and Lori kind of touched on it, it is a known public administration principle that if you provide good support services, you then, cause people to take advantage of those services. Again, that's not a bad thing, but if we get this problem solved, we will probably be a community of choice of people that are looking for an opportunity. So, and then one other thing, and I'll get out of the way here, just by the numbers, if 85,000 of the city's funds at $4 an hour over a year's time would support about 10 additional positions. If the number remains 85% of the 800,000, then that would support about 81, increasing the wages for 81 positions, by my math.
And I don't mean to put Amanda on the spot, but since the reduction in United Way funding was mentioned, is that funding that could be expected to be returned to early child care, or is the United Way doing something different?
If everybody donated, we're down about half in the past 9 years. Yep, we used to raise about $1 million, we raised about $500,000.
Does that
Something's gotta give.
Mm-hmm.
Does that decrease correspond with kind of the shift in approach?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the way fundraising happens, first of all, if you didn't know, we have 244 nonprofits in Salina, Kansas alone, 244. And we serve most of the communities in Northwest Kansas who don't pay for those. They don't put the dollars into that. So our community is supporting those services for most we may be giving to DVAC, and DVAC is supporting domestic abuse services all over Northwest Kansas, but they're raising money mostly in our community. And so with 244 nonprofits, that's about 100 more than there were about 10 years ago, you know? And so you can't expect that anybody raises the same amount of money because it spreads. Generationally, we have 5 generations in the workforce now, and they each choose to give in a whole different way. Anybody here who works for nonprofits can tell you that. And nobody has enough staffing or ability to market to each one of those. So yeah, I wouldn't expect, we're doing strategic planning with the assumption that we'll be a $500,000 organization from now on. Because, and that being said, historically, United Way didn't allow agencies to fundraise when United Way fundraised, and that is no longer the case. So, which is part of the goal of self-sustaining for other organizations, is that we didn't feel like it was okay to say, you can't raise any money in the giving time of the year. That's not an okay thing to do. But it means it's dispersed differently. So I hope that, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, it does. Thank
yeah.
you.
I would say the other part of that is the desire for agencies to have a different, to apply differently for funding. And as far as most folks know, if you're going to apply for $5,000 worth of funding, what the expectation is for application and report back would be different than $89,000. And staff is so limited that the ability to do that kind of application and report back is hard. And so that generates some of the change too. You can $5,000 to $10,000 at a time going out requires a lot less work for both sides than 50, 60, 70, 80,000, as you guys know too.
Could you give a shameless plug for an event tomorrow morning?
Yeah, if you'd like to come find out about stories that are happening, you can come to our kickoff tomorrow morning at 7 at the Hilton Garden Inn, one of our new places in town. And you can contribute when it comes in the mail. Extra.
So the presentation that I prepared for you is a little bit more granular, I guess you would say, and give you a little bit of background, what we've done previously, as well as give you some information about the role of the EDO and how we might consider this request. So I'll try to run through this pretty quickly, but in 2002, Governor Gray's chaired a meeting of 95 businesses, and there was a working group of about 35 community leaders that researched the need and strategized about improvements. They identified 4 components for quality early childhood education, and they acknowledged that it estimated annual cost of $3 million to support that initiative. And the 4 things that they identified were subsidy to support families at $316,000, Smart Start, which is the amount that the city ultimately funded, at $85,000 a year. Quality improvements to centers at about $500,000, and marketing at $30,000. And so found with the assistance of others, found some documentation in terms of the communications that were leading up to the 2004 sales tax. And so in anticipation of that quarter-cent sales tax, the city manager had some notes to the city commission where he discussed the request received to date for sales tax allocations in anticipation of the quarter-cent sales tax being passed. There was a request for $275,000 from the Chamber of Commerce for economic development, $1 million for early childhood education. There was discussion about human services type grants with an unspecified use as well as an unspecified amount. And there was discussion about other city capital improvement projects, specifically the North Ohio overpass, not necessarily funding it in its entirety, but noting the estimated cost for that was $330,000 a year. And so on June 21st, there was a sales tax request from Smart Start, and at that time they asked for $85,000 a year for calendar years 2005, 6, and 7. In that information, they indicated that local match would leverage the $525,000 that Lori and Liddell discussed. And so from 2001 to 2004, it described that the state had the major tobacco settlement, and they had previously invested $1.7 million in Salina County. Salina Regional Health Foundation funded $282,000 over those 4 years as the initial local match. So then we went through a series of sales tax elections and increases. So the quarter-cent sales tax became effective July 1 of 2004. The average annual proceeds for that particular sales tax were about $2.4 million, and the ordinance that authorized that sales tax allocated 87.5% for those categories listed there: capital improvements, major equipment, parks and recreation, capital improvements, debt service, property tax stabilization, and human services grants. And then 12.5% was set aside for economic development, an economic development fund to be managed by the city of Salina. And then it got my attention that it actually specified and no other uses, so seemed pretty clear about that. Then in 2009, there was an election to raise it from a quarter to 4/10. That took effect on April 1 of 2009. It had an intended expiration date of 2019. That ordinance specified uses of capital improvement projects, major equipment, construction, operation, and maintenance of essentially Kenwood Code, debt service on bond issues, bonds issued for projects, property tax stabilization, and economic development. So you'll see that human services fell away between the 2004 and the 2009 sales tax authorization. And then, as I think you know, in October of 2016, 3 years in advance of the expiration of the 4/10s, the vote was successful and a 3/4 cent sales tax was initiated for a 20-year term, both in terms of the marketing as well as the ordinance that was improving neighborhood streets and drainage, stabilizing property taxes, quality park system, maintenance, constructing and maintaining capital improvements, funding equipment, funding bond issues for capital improvements, and continuing to support a fund managed by the city to attract quality jobs. So, they've kind of touched on this already, but in terms of the human services grant applications that we received in that 2004 to 2009 timeframe, CAPS is in there at the $85,000 for the 3-year time period, as well as $70,000 in year 4 and $71,000 in year 5. And then the contribution was discontinued when the 2009 sales tax went into effect. St. Sart received funding as well. And DVAC received some funding, and then the Kansas Association of Child Care Resources. There are other applications and requests, everything from Skyfire to municipal band, that we kind of treated as outside agency requests. And some of those, St. Sart as an example, and Skyfire, we recognized were kind of in keeping with services that the city needed, and we rolled those into the general fund rather than made them continue to make annual requests. But as it relates to CAPS and Smart Start, the funding ended in 2010. And so this is the table that, similar to the one that was in their presentation, is trying to break out who provided the local source and the amount of that source, and then how much state grant funding it leveraged. So I don't want to go into too much in detail, but we've got a couple things going on as it relates to this request and the EDA's role and where these funds might come from. And so this coalition approached the EDO and requested funding, and somewhat simultaneously the EDO had another request for funding, and it kind of called the question of the funds that we as a city provide to the EDO and the intended purpose of those, and whether the EDO in and of itself is a grant-making body to pass along grants by way of our funds. Now, the member agreement contemplates that additional private funds can be raised, and I think that probably creates an opportunity for the EDO to directly make grants, but to my knowledge, there haven't been any private funds raised to date. So the member agreement is entered into by the city, the chamber, the county, and the airport authority, and it calls out roles and responsibilities of business recruitment, entrepreneurship, metrics, research, and marketing. And then there's also articles of incorporation that have similar language about recruitment and encouraging and supporting entrepreneurship and businesses, economic development metrics, conduct economic development research, marketing, and foster communication with targeted businesses. So then we also passed a resolution that dissolved the Salina Economic Development Incentives Council. That used to be an advisory body, the City Commission, that provided advice on funding requests for economic development prospects. It specifically expressed the intent to continue an economic development fund, and it was intended to address the role of the EDO going forward. And it gets into a little bit more broader statements that probably create the latitude for funding requests like this. And so, in particular, it calls out the EDO making recommendations to the Commission regarding grants from the sales tax for things such as human investment in Salina and Saline County in order to provide a stimulus to the local economy. It talks about recommending other proposed uses for economic development special sales tax funds necessary to prepare Salina and Saline County for prospective business development, making recommendations to the Commission and or other government bodies regarding other public economic development incentives, making recommendations regarding other public economic development incentives. So that resolution probably contains the most broadly worded language as it relates to making recommendations about this type of a program. So then, one of the things I wanted to be sure that you're aware of, and this is a pretty busy chart, but this is the Economic Development Fund. We maintain it as a separate fund. We allocate a percentage allocation of the sales tax into it. And so each one of those vertical bars is an entity that receives funding. And so you'll see that the EDO is kind of in the middle of that list and shows $275,000 and then $250,000 a year of funding. There's other categories of funding. The chamber was in there for a year or two. There's some miscellaneous funding that is itemized off to the side, and that's some particular grants for a prospect and the study with the K-State Polytechnic, and then the 2019 is budgeted money that has yet to be spent. There's a sales tax reimbursement that we agreed to incentivize them to locate on the Iron Street location. There's some marketing grants, you may recall, that we funded for the Airport Authority to market the SkyWest as a provider, and they've since found another way to fund that, so I think that 2019 will be the last year for that request. And then there's an annual funding amount for Salina Downtown Inc. for the facade program. And so that is the most consistent and recurring expenditure, and it's at $95,000 a year most recently. So while we're trying to report the individual expenditures by recipient, I also wanted to share with you the fund balance. And you can see that it peaked in 2016 and it's declining. So we generally see about $335,000 to $350,000 of annual sales tax proceeds that go into the sales tax fund based on our annual formula and allocation. So if 350 is the number and 250 is the annual allocation to the EDO, it's pretty easy math. That leaves 100,000, and that's the amount of the request that's before you. Now, there is a balance of about $700,000 in the fund, and so there is some funds to work with if an economic development prospect came along. But at the rate we're going without this request, we're spending this fund towards zero. So I would suggest that you certainly need to be aware of that as you make decisions about funding requests, and that we just need to be very deliberate in what our intentions may be. One vision I think is an incredible victory, both in terms of the number of jobs and the wage rates, but the other thing that's encouraging to me is there is no city money in landing that prospect. Between the EDO and the Airport Authority and capitalizing on our resources, which we've said is the strategic way we want to approach economic development, we were able to land that prospect with lease improvements, facility improvements at the airport, but without the need to provide direct city subsidy. Now, having said that, you remember the Siemens project in Hutch. We competed on that project. We were running a cost-benefit analysis every time we had an iteration of a proposal, and we finally had to say, that's it. We're not breaking even anymore, and that's the most we can give. Hutchinson's proposal just blew ours away. I honestly don't know how. They acknowledged they didn't do a cost-benefit analysis before they made the offer, and they also acknowledged that they just emptied the cupboards. They took everything they had in terms of economic development funds and put it into that one project. And we could do that, and if the right prospect comes along, you if we could level this spending out, you have about $700,000 to work with. So I don't want to make it seem like it's, the sky is falling, but the balance is falling gradually at the moment. And so that's basically the extent of what I wanted to be sure to share with you. The last thing is, so with the EDO serving in their advisory role, they've heard at least two presentations from the Child Care Coalition. They turned to staff and asked, so what is appropriate for us to do? My response was, if you conclude that this is an economic development initiative, then it will be appropriate for you to consider that and make a recommendation with regard to the request that's before you. Not so much a funding allocation, but a recommendation to the City Commission about the use of funds in the Economic Development Fund. So the EDO considered that at their last meeting.
August 15th.
I'll turn that part of the conversation over to Mitch from the EDO.
Thank you. We did meet twice with the representatives of the coalition and had some pretty extensive discussion whether is this an economic development issue. That was part of the discussion. I think from the presentation you all received today, which is very similar to what we received, the board agreed that it was an issue. And if any of you all heard me talk about issues that are facing us, workforce is the #1 issue, and this obviously is part of the workforce issue. So on the 15th, the board voted 8-4 to support the request of the coalition to come before the commission and make a $100,000 request from the incentive fund. So we are here. I've got Gail is here. John Gunn is chairman, is behind me somewhere. I don't know if anybody else came up. Yes, it was 8-0.
Not 8-4. You said 8-4.
Did I?
Yeah.
We only have.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna ask.
Well, we added some numbers, no.
Maybe you did say something.
We're trying to stuff the board. No, 8-0. 8-0, and the person who was absent would have voted in favor of it as well, but she was out of town. So thank you for correcting that.
If I could throw in two things. There was some discussion, and I think the motion was amended, and I don't recall the wording exactly, but the premise was that it go to providers that have a graduated fee schedule of some sort. So the intention being, not only does it benefit the child care employee in terms of their wages, but it also is directed at benefiting families that meet some income qualifications or have some heightened need. And then one point that Liddell made in a conversation that we had that I thought was significant, and I don't think it's come out today, is while city funding may not solve the problem, being able to say that the city is in some fashion probably shows very well and helps with fundraising efforts.
That was one thing I wanted you all to touch on. I don't think it really came out about, we've got 105,000 in the bank now. We're asking for another 100,000, but there is a plan to solicit, and I want you all to touch on that, if you would, about, yes, there is going to be requests from, to the private sector to be part of this.
Well, if I could jump in before you do that, it's totally within the governing body's purview that this could be a challenge grant, or there could be strings attached to the funding that it's provided with particular conditions so that it's targeted in a way that meets your expectations.
So is this $100,000 per year for how many years, or just a one-time $100,000, and then we'll relook at it again, or the next commission will look at it again?
1 year.
The EDO consideration was 1 year. I've yet to meet anyone that'll turn down $100,000 a year compared to a one-time expenditure. But at the moment, it is that initial $100,000.
So this is to build that $10 million.
No, so that'd be for the 3 year of operations.
Yeah, I can't get back to that slide.
Okay,
but it's
I just wanted to know which.
That's a separate kind of campaign, the 10 million.
We'll be running those simultaneously.
This is the active daily campaign, not the endowments. side.
Correct.
Where they-
Right, correct. For operations.
Operations. So does this push the private sector into more, I mean, you know, you've got the person next door that's got, you know, 35 kids running around the front yard that they call their daycare. Does this push anything
Yeah.
to help that group too?
Absolutely, and I think that's part of why we're really wanting them to come into the fold, into that licensing fold, is so that they could get these resources. If they're not licensed, they don't get a penny of these resources. They have to be regulated by Salina County.
Don't they have to be like?
Yes, they do.
They're
Supposed to be.
They're supposed to be, okay.
If they're running around with 35 kids at
Well,
their house, they're
yeah,
not.
I didn't mean 30,
Yeah,
but I mean-
they're not legal.
Yeah,
We
but-
want them.
Any child care provider must be a licensed
correct.
child
Yes,
care
that is
provider.
To be legally operating.
And legally, okay.
And a big piece of our plan is to go out to business, so many of you will be hearing from us, that we want individual businesses to come in to this funding strategy to help us, and to match those dollars that are public and private and then business, so.
There was a conversation at the EDO meeting by a board member who's a CEO of a local company, and it was in open session, so I guess it's public to share, but he shared that his thinking kind of evolved. First, I don't think there's a recognition there's a problem, and I think there was a conversation with his HR staff and others and a recognition that there was a problem. Then there was a conversation about, as an employer, how do we solve the problem for our employees? And they I think, kind of quickly concluded they didn't know how to make a contribution that could be targeted back to their employees, and that then caused them to think that it's a community problem the city needs to solve. I'm not sure I agree with the last conclusion in its entirety, but that was kind of the thought process that they went through. I can tell you, having worked in other communities, that there are employers that provide on-site childcare, and they are employers of choice by far. I mean, you can take your child with you to work, you can go see them over breaks, you can have lunch with them, and it's just an incredible benefit. But our community hasn't.
Yeah, are we unusual the fact that we do not have some of our larger employers that have their own daycare, or is that just not a?
It's such a hard regulating industry to enter that most businesses don't want to step foot into it.
There are very few for-profit child businesses that operate childcare centers in Kansas.
So we also, during one of the mini hacks for the hackathon event, we focused just on childcare. And one of the things that came out of that hackathon that really kind of reiterated what we had learned over the last few months, because we of course started with this discussion with strategic planning, was like, do you build a building? It sounds really easy, right? Let's build your building, let's get a place for the kids. But what gets really complicated about this is it's actually, I think, has a lot of similarities to housing, because what happens is you have people wanting choice too. So as a parent, where do I want to put my child? Maybe I'm not comfortable with a center. Maybe I'm not comfortable with a home environment, kind of like housing. Maybe I don't want a condo, or what's going to work for people, or the hours or the days. So the solution gets really complicated. And what we found is when you build just one building, you don't really get to that level of complexity and start to meet those different needs. That when you start to address wages and employment in different types of centers or different types of home environments, is that you can provide a greater level of choice, kind of with that same financial investment, and have a more long-term investment. And in going through the hackathon process, even Justin was kind of seeing that and bringing that out to us, and we were like, oh, okay, maybe we're not completely, on the right track. And then having some proven data was very helpful.
I'm just going to interrupt for a few minutes because it is time for our open session at 3:45. We can come back to this in a few minutes. Anyone here want to talk about anything else? All right.
I just really come to see Joe, but I heard a few words talking about wages. It reminded me of what was printed inside of the paper. Somebody was bragging how your wages have increased here in Salina County. I wouldn't want to brag about what the wages you pay here in Salina County, because I called down to Kellogg's. They make frosted flakes. You know what they pay their assembly line workers? $28 an hour. This was 2 years ago. So if you want your economy here in Salina County to grow, you better tell these employers around here to pay some wages. Because that's what it's about, is wages, folks. We gotta have wages. You can't, these young people, they can't make it anymore. I bought a new car in 1966 when I got out of the service, $3,200. I was making $3 an hour. That car now is $42,000, and you're making $17 an hour, so don't go bragging about your wages you pay. That kind of gets me. People brag you pay so much wages around here. But I wasn't going to, but I just come to see Joe because I got a piece where I want to give him one. And now that I'm up here running my mouth, it's about waste products. These wind tires, folks. There's 725,000 tons of them wind tire blades out there. What are you going to do with them? You don't have them in here in Salina County. They don't know what to do with them. We better worry about waste disposal. Your plastics. That's why I wanted to show Joe. You can read this. Him and I are on the same page on this. Oh, I did mention one time, and I did look it up. You need a wage raise. You know what the mayor makes up in Salt Lake City, or this small town, you know? $50,000 a year.
Well, I've been told by school board members, don't complain about our wage. It's $300 a month more than theirs.
Truth.
True.
You can double my wage. It costs a dime.
I have some questions that aren't as much directed to the child care initiative, which I think is great, and I mean, I don't see it just as an economic development issue. It's doing the right thing as a community issue. So I don't need to have the economic development spend so much put on it, but I am really concerned about our economic development fund, and you talked about how we are spending it down at this point. How many more years are we obligated to paying Save-A-Lot back? I noticed we've got, what, 4 or 5 years up there, and I couldn't remember, was it a total or was it a certain number of years?
It was both, whichever occurs first. So it was $250,000 or 10 years, whichever occurred first. I just don't recall the start date of that 10 years.
Okay, so that's something that's an obligation that's staying on our plate for a while, because it looked like
Yeah.
they were bringing in about $25,000 a year, and
Right.
we surely can't be more than year 5 on that, so we've got
Well,
5
actually,
years.
hang on a second.
Okay.
If we figure out the year it started.
I believe it'd be 2017.
That's a little too small.
I think about 2017, because I don't think we were paying them yet when I retired, but we were very close.
Yeah, well, it looks like 2016.
2016.
So 2025?
Okay, so we're obligated with that for 2025. And then I guess my other question is, we're talking about, leveraging and making sure that, that we're holding these folks accountable and expecting a lot of private fundraising. Well, the flip side of that for me is, what have we done with the EDO in terms of private fundraising? Because at this point, we've got the $250,000 a year investment in the EDO, and I'm not seeing that coming down. And I mean, my preference would be, I think it's valuable to have both, but if it's a matter of we have to adjust some of our allocations so that we can accommodate this through the economic development. I mean, that 250 is a big number that takes up the lion's share of our sales tax proceeds. So that's just kind of what I'm thinking in terms of, I think we need to have a discussion about what our priorities are with the Economic Development Fund, so that we can make sure that we're funding it according to what the collective priorities are. And I appreciated your emphasis on the EDO's role being to advise us or provide recommendations. Mm-hmm. But was there, I think was there like a workforce website that they went ahead and they actually supplied the grant monies for?
It was
Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner, I would I would say it was us taking part. It was not really a grant, it's a partnership more with the chamber moving that program forward. So, I mean, you could call it a grant, but I see it as something that we would have been paying for either internally, we would have been doing it ourselves, or in cooperation, we're able to jointly do the chamber.
And see, that's what
So it's a spin,
It's a spin because basically you're putting $10,000 into an agency that's one of the founding partners, one of the organizations that's part of the EDO. So then I guess my question is, could we take $100,000 out and go ahead and, if the city decides to allocate that, it's a lot bigger than $10,000, but maybe that's, maybe it's time to.
We have a 3-year contract. That's
Yeah.
our schedule of agreement. So we're in the 2nd year of the 3rd year. So that's up for discussion. Obviously, the commission has the authority to do what you want to do.
Right.
We're going to have a time crunch in a second. Is there a time restraint on this request? Because I still have comments and we're not going to finish this before 3:57. 3 minutes to the bathroom before we go.
Mayor, I think the group is, we're at a point bringing this forward today. We need to set a date to have the next discussion. So it's not a immediate. Yeah.
We recognize that this was more than just an agenda item. That's why we made it a study session item. I guess my question would be, do you think we're far enough along that we can bring it back as an agenda item, or would you like additional study session?
For me, I would say so. I mean, I think that I would agree with everything they're saying out there and all the statistics, so I agree it's appropriate funding at this point, but to go multi-year, then I think it becomes a community conversation at that. So I hope you're really successful in your fundraising and you get this same presentation out to the majority of the community. I don't think the city can.
I'd like to get another 15 to 20 minutes of, or round figure, 30 minutes of study session.
Okay, well, we do have some open study session dates about 45 days out, so that might be an option. I don't know that we have any topics that sometimes we have topics that don't fill the entire time, or we can put two together, but I'm not aware of, other than a wastewater treatment plant tour, I'm not aware of any that might work, and that's probably not the best way to.
So the only question I had on the whole thing was when we were talking about, is this a yearly, or is this going to be and I mean, as long as I know it's just a one-time deal right now, I'm fine with it.
And believe me, there's no greater personal but perceived champion for this cause in my mind than me. But we're getting in the business of paying other employees, and we're barely paying our employees. And it's going to have a defined benefit for a certain number of teachers. I'd rather see that 86,000 go towards pushing the effort to get the 10 million than just, if we're going to spend it, I'd rather us be the catalyst for the bigger fund.
So in the interest of time, could I poll you, how many of you would like more study session conversation?
Just like it doesn't even need to be like
wedge it in
study
somewhere.
session, it could be just like a
Would you
regular.
want to come in early, 30 minutes early, on a day?
I'm fine with any of that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. We have quite a few stacking up, but we'll look at the agenda planner and try to make that happen.
All right. All right, everybody, data and success. So we're coming back in here.
No.